Tonight, a day one investigation that took the government by surprise. There's something tobacco companies don't want you to know.
The industry manipulates nicotine, takes it out, puts it back in, uses it as if it were sugar being put in candy.
Why are you artificially spiking your cigarettes with nicotine?
We are not in any way doing that.
Cigarettes. They'll hook you fast, and it's not just an accident of nature.
They don't want anybody looking at their product so that they can doctor it, they can alter it.
A day one investigation that could change the tobacco industry forever.
Hi, I'm Brent Stafford, and this is RegWatch by RegulatorWatch.com. The footage you just saw on our cold open comes from the ABC News magazine Day One, which aired in 1994. That two-part special was among the first major broadcasts to expose how tobacco companies were manipulating nicotine levels to make cigarettes more addictive. It was an opening salvo in the new cigarette war that ultimately brought big tobacco to heel and helped launch the modern tobacco control movement. Joining us today to help answer that question is Cliff Douglas, tobacco control law and policy expert. Douglas is a veteran of America's tobacco wars who helped take on big tobacco during the landmark battles of the 1990s. As assistant director of the Coalition on Smoking or Health, he coordinated the national effort to remove smoking from airplanes on behalf of three powerhouse NGOs, the American Cancer Society, American Lung Association, and the American Heart Association. He worked on litigation leading to the 1998 Master Settlement Agreement and served as consulting tobacco control policy advisor to the U.S. Surgeon General. More recently, Douglas served as director of the University of Michigan Tobacco Research Network and as adjunct professor at the University of Michigan School of Public Health. He also served as vice president for tobacco control at the American Cancer Society. Cliff, it's always great to see you. Thanks for coming back on the show.
Thanks for having me back. I appreciate that, Brent, and the very generous introduction.
Before we begin, a quick note to our viewers. Today's episode is part 2 of our 2-part conversation with Cliff Douglas. You can find part 1 at regulatorwatch.com and on all of our social channels. Cliff, let's jump right in with the 1994 Day One series. Is it fair to say that the modern war on nicotine began in the 1990s?
I think it is. There was a historic spark, of course, from the 1988 Surgeon General's report released by C. Everett Koop, which focused on nicotine addiction. It was the first major formal statement from the U.S. government on the fact that nicotine could cause dependency, and particularly in cigarettes. There was an article by a New York Times reporter, Cheryl Stolberg, who is still a health and political reporter at the Times. She published in 1998. It was titled "War on Nicotine Began with a Cough." And I note that because it was a retrospective on what had been happening in the prior years. And she was referencing my having brought forward an industry scientist who had been codenamed Deep Cough, who shared information with ABC and the FDA regarding the engineering of the cigarette, and it then contributed to the ABC News Day One report that you mentioned, and also the FDA's first investigation into these issues that was launched in 1994 and led to its efforts to regulate tobacco for public health purposes for the first time.
Now, a lot of people probably imagine that bringing big tobacco to heel came down to the issue that it caused cancer and, all of the health effects around that. But it's really the actual case that it's about the nicotine, isn't it?
Yeah, nicotine was pretty central. I can tell you, in 1994, it really sticks in my mind. It was I was 6 years into this career. We'd worked on things you could say more traditional, like smoking on airplanes, and cigarette advertising, and those kinds of things, all important. But we really hadn't, in public health, focused on the product itself, apart from obviously the deleterious health effects that involved obviously a number of different types of cancer, and heart disease and the like. The fact that an understanding was strengthened then regarding the delivery of nicotine from the cigarette. I think Mitch Seller, to his credit, later framed it as, the dirty needle, and separating nicotine from the dirty needle was really what was important there, because then you could have harm reduction. Nicotine then became the focus because it pointed to the argument that it was very difficult for people who smoked to stop. And the kicker there that I was involved in presenting to the public through the media and then through the FDA's own investigation was that nicotine was controlled quite precisely in the manufacturing process. And some folks noted, well, that should have been self-evident because cigarettes were marketed with specific nicotine and tar figures. So clearly something was being done to assure that they were consistent across certain products and so on. But the notion that it was being controlled in that way and leading to widespread, arguably compulsive use by many millions of people, resulting in great harm to them, did capture the public imagination and the attention of health regulators, the media, and then, of course, Congress, which in 1994 held at least 10 hearings before Representative Henry Waxman's health subcommittee in the House of Representatives. And so it really took over, and it was one of the major focuses in the launching of the Attorney General lawsuits. There was even a class action launched only weeks after the ABC Day One episode, alleging that the companies had controlled nicotine and many people became addicted and sick as a result of that. So it just was, a fundamental sort of linchpin to a lot of the activity taking place in government, in the courtroom, in the media, and just in public health circles as they were seeking to understand and educate people about it.
From these tobacco fields comes one of the world's most profitable and addictive substances. To many smokers, cigarettes are simply leaves rolled in white paper. In reality, cigarettes are a complex, scientifically engineered product about which little is known publicly.
Do you think the tobacco companies have been open and honest with people about what's in their product?
Absolutely not. In fact, they've done just the opposite. They've basically blocked any attempts for us to give an honest accounting of the American public of the ingredients within the product.
One ingredient contained in these tobacco leaves is known: nicotine. The 1988 Surgeon General's report identified nicotine as a highly addictive drug and said this is why smoking can be as difficult to quit as heroin or cocaine. One of the writers of the report was addiction expert Dr. Jack Henningfield.
The cigarette is essentially the crack cocaine form of nicotine delivery.
Now, a lengthy Day One investigation has uncovered perhaps the tobacco industry's last best secret: how it artificially adds nicotine to cigarettes to keep people smoking and boost profits. It is here that nearly pure nicotine is brought ashore to be combined with alcohol. It's called denaturing. The mixture can then be applied to tobacco during the manufacturing process for, among other things, flavoring. The cigarette makers say this mixture leaves only a tiny amount of nicotine on the tobacco. Still, any kind of nicotine manipulation disturbs critics like Cliff Douglas of the American Cancer Society.
The public doesn't know that the industry manipulates nicotine, takes it out, puts it back in, uses it as if it were sugar being put in candy. They don't have a clue.
Neither, apparently, do members of Congress.
Well, it disgusts me.
Were you aware of that?
No, I wasn't. They don't want anybody looking at their product. And the reason is exactly what you just went through, so that they can doctor it, they can alter it, they can do anything with it, and they can literally jeopardize the health of the American public without having any consequence.
So as we heard in the cold open, that nicotine was branded as a highly addictive drug, And the claim was that it is so difficult to quit, it's as difficult as heroin or cocaine. And that comparison, I have to tell you, I heard that. I was in my 20s in the 1990s and a smoker. And boy, everybody seemed to understand that, oh my God, it's like heroin. And then now today, though, when I look at nicotine, I think that that was total demonization.
You know, it was demonization. And I was part of, if you think of it that way, as one of those who was promoting the concern and the skepticism around nicotine. And I think it's important when we look at that to consider the time and the contrasts between that time and where we are now and where we found ourselves in more recent years, because it speaks to how we understand nicotine and the role that it plays and the health impact it has and can have on many millions of people, not only for worse in the sense of when we were looking, deeply into it in the 1990s, all around the frame of nicotine and cigarettes, understood to be the leading preventable cause of death in society globally. And now, when nicotine, when separated from that dirty needle, can be and is used to help people not smoke when it is, it appears in original or synthetic form in alternative nicotine products that are non-combustible. The demonization of it back then was a creature of its time. And, I feel very uncomfortable today about the fact that that probably played some role in some of the persistent misunderstanding that we see today among healthcare providers, among doctors and nurses, pharmacists even, although they tend to be better educated than others, interestingly, and other allied health professionals, where the majority think that nicotine causes the illnesses, cancer, for example, the heart disease, and the preventable deaths that result from smoking, when in fact, as we know, all of that damage from smoking results from the production of more than 7,000 chemicals, including dozens of carcinogens, cancer-causing substances, when a cigarette is burned and the user inhales smoke. But when nicotine is separated from that, it does nothing of the kind. Heck, it's used in nicotine, in cessation medicines. It's the same nicotine that you see in a patch or in gum or in an inhaler, a medicinal inhaler. And in fact, this misunderstanding, even impedes people's and doctors recommending people's use of those products because they're concerned about the effects of nicotine. So back in the 90s, it really did focus attention on some of the needed reform that we needed, focusing, for example, on the potential for, in the United States, FDA regulation for health purposes, which it never had authority or exercised authority to do, despite the fact that, in the 20th century, there was so much harm caused by smoking, and the FDA was a chief regulatory health agency. It also, led to the Master Settlement Agreement and a focus on youth smoking, which, probably truly was an epidemic in the mid to late 90s, until later, of course, it's just plummeted and practically disappeared since, in part, I would say, due to the availability of alternative products. And, it's just time to really turn around and treat this drug in very different ways from the ways we felt needed to be, the way it was managed back in the 90s. It is a different time. It is a different place. And likening it to heroin or cocaine today makes no sense whatsoever. I would add one footnote to that because it's a very interesting one to me. On the ABC Day One show, when there was reference made to nicotine in cigarettes being the crack cocaine form of nicotine delivery. The expert scientist who made that comment was Dr. Jack Henningfield. And I mention that because Jack, a good friend, was a co-editor of the Surgeon General's report on nicotine addiction in 1988, a true expert in this field. Jack is a leading expert, supporter, and advocate for tobacco harm reduction today. And I can't speak for anyone else, but I know that Dr. Henningfield makes very clear the role that nicotine can play in helping people not smoke, switch away from it to alternative products, and help their, improve their health and save their lives. So that's just, to me, a really critical symbol of the evolution that we've experienced now over these, multiple decades.
But in a way, Cliff, he was absolutely right, because as a delivery mechanism, the cigarette is like a crack cocaine, but the nicotine is benign. So if you remove the nicotine from it, then you lose all the power of the of the crack cocaine part of it.
Yes, that's exactly right. I mean, Jack Henningfield was right then, and he'd be right to say the same thing today. The change is that we are now in 2026, not 1996, and the marketplace and the potential for really driving down smoking by helping the industry and seeing the industry transition to a different type of marketplace over time with helpful, appropriate incentives and just ways to accelerate this. It's going to help transform the world of tobacco and nicotine. And as I've said before, I'm confident that that's going to happen. I'm very optimistic. The question isn't whether it will, but how quickly we can get to, a critical mass where we've really turned the corner on that. I was just seeing today that there are something in the neighborhood of 140 million people using e-cigarettes globally now. And over the past, I think it's 6 years, something along those lines, there's been a 158% increase in the number of people who are doing that. And the remarkable thing is that they're doing that in the face of very influential stakeholders, authorities who are acting in opposition to that and spreading misinformation about the realities of this. And yet you have this extraordinary number of people who have found their way to an alternative, particularly for those smokers who either can't or just don't want to stop using nicotine, to use it in a way that's gonna be so helpful to them. So I mean, we're turning the corner on that, and the faster we can move along and correct the misinformation, and also turn the world of policy, health policy, towards supporting this, in reasonable and careful and effective ways, the better off everyone will be.
So we saw, witnessed, and still witness the use of the term epidemic to describe vaping, teen vaping in the U.S., in Canada, and in elsewhere. I mean, is that word accurate? And if not, why does tobacco control cling so tightly to it?
Oh, epidemic is a loaded word. It makes people think of, 100 or more years ago with cholera and, COVID. It makes you think of the worst possible circumstances in society where large numbers of people are infected or becoming sick by other means and dying. And, when I hear epidemic, I think of these thriller movies which are designed around, frightening you because, I mean, holy cow, that's not what you want to have happening around you. The fact of the matter is there is no youth vaping epidemic, and it's now past tense when you even talk about any kind of youth smoking epidemic. There is no tobacco related or even nicotine apart from tobacco related epidemic with kids. And we don't hear the term used as much now as we did 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago. We shouldn't hear it at all. And I would just add that something that requires some more attention is when we hear about youth, any kind of prevalence, smoking prevalence, vaping prevalence, it's judged by whether a kid who has responded to a survey has used a given product one time in the past 30 days, which means they may have been at a party. We've all been there, and if we can remember, this is how it works. We're at a party, we're over at a friend's house, and you're just experimenting, you're having fun. You might use a vape in that occasion, and you're experimenting with it. And we know, in fact, that when there was a spike in vaping prevalence around 2018, 2019, it was a phase of experimentation. Something became faddish. A lot of kids were trying it, but look what's happened in the years since. It's plummeted. It's way down because it doesn't have that interesting cool factor anymore. It's not that this isn't a problem or a concern or a challenge. It is, but we have to have perspective around all of these things so that the way we respond to them are appropriate and most effective based on the facts at hand.
Let me ask you, what do you make of the CDC's continued use of the term EVALI, which stands for e-cigarette or vaping use associated lung injury? It's a bit of a mouthful. EVALI.
Yeah, yes, it is. And of course, the significant aspect to it there, particularly, is the E at the beginning of the acronym, which, as you've noted, refers to e-cigarette, and it doesn't belong there. It simply doesn't belong there. And I give great credit to mine and others, colleague Dr. Mike Pesco, who is a health economist and has given special attention to this now in recent years, and sought with the support of dozens of others of us who are expert in the field, including physicians, scientists, and others. We made a great effort to get CDC to change the language, to reframe what they share on their websites and elsewhere with the public, and to rename EVALI to something correct. Because we know very well, and it was determined very quickly when the EVALI phenomenon was taking place around 2019, 2020, that the illnesses and deaths that resulted from some vaping products were due to illicit, adulterated vaping product containing THC, primary ingredient in cannabis, and not nicotine, and they were adulterated with vitamin E acetate used as a thickening agent, which caused serious reactions in too many people's lungs. It was a real problem. It was unlawful. It was identified. It was intervened with, and it was stopped. And those illnesses and deaths disappeared. And by the way, they didn't occur elsewhere in the world. And what does that tell you? Because those illicit products weren't being circulated in other countries. So the fact that the E continues to be in front of EVALI sends a message that continues to be leveraged and exploited by those who are trying to interfere with this critical harm reduction focused public health effort.
Well, and it's just incorrect because it sounds like that there is some kind of a disease out there that's connected to e-cigarette use. And while it might be out of the news right now, it still exists. And let me just point it to you. Here's like, if you go to Harvard, on their Harvard Medical School, the EVALI new information on vaping-induced lung injury, and now that's from 2020, but for one, that should be down, but two, here's 2023 from Harvard. 2023. Can vaping damage your lungs? What do we do and don't know? Vaping is on the rise among teenagers, but reports link it to severe lung disease. in 2023 when vaping use was on the decline massively.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing wrong with that piece is everything. And, the fact that obviously vaping was not on the increase. And by the way, in 2026, you still see references to vaping increasing among kids. I've seen it in social media and selectively because you can only do so much in responding to a flood. I will engage there on X or on LinkedIn or somewhere else where these arguments are being made. And there's all sorts of conflation with some of these historic events like EVALI, and we just have to continue to correct the record. I will note, and while I'm an optimist and I know that we are going to succeed in the long run in this area, and I'm just delighted to be one spoke on a big wheel participating in this. We do have a challenge before us, and the way I've thought about it is the other side, if we look at it that way, in what I've termed an internecine, war between public health or tobacco control and those supporting harm reduction. The thing is, on the other side, the complaint is very simple to articulate. And I have to say, not that everybody's ill-intended over there. There are folks who believe this. They're also told by authorities within their bubble that A, B, and C are the case, but they will argue that there's targeting of kids for addiction. The industry is involved, the industry, which is so many different things, but the industry is targeting those kids, and it's evil. And it's and it's addictive, as I've already noted. So that is their sword. And on the other side, how do we respond? We respond with science and information. We deal with nuance, explaining some of the things that we've been talking about here today. We're responding with a notebook. And if you can sort of envision a sword fighting a notebook, it doesn't look very fair. And that's the challenge here, because we're dealing with mass media. We're dealing with, look at that. You found, one particular item on a website connected to Harvard, and they're all over the place. If you look at local health departments' websites, I'm in Michigan, I see it here locally. It's a lot to clean up, and especially when you still have, again, the majority of physicians who believe that nicotine causes cancer and heart disease and the other serious illnesses that result from smoking, and the public is misled. So, look, this is a real challenge, but I have to say I'm excited about continuing to work with leading experts and having platforms that you generously provide and others do to talk about the reality of this area and continue to educate as many people as you can in leadership positions, political, medical, in the media, organizational, just everywhere we can, because we can't stop doing that, or we're going to slow down the process as opposed to speed it up.
I want to turn to what I see as one of the most damaging characterizations of nicotine vapes and other safer nicotine products, in that they are a health hazard rather than a tool for harm reduction. I'll use Canada as an example. They effectively wrote that into the law. It's right up at the top that nicotine vapes are a health hazard. Is that the same perspective in the U.S. in regards to FDA regulation and the deeming rule?
Well, I think it's quite similar, because the default that we've seen implemented at the FDA and its Center for Tobacco Products, essentially since the FDA was granted authority by Congress and signed into law by President Obama in 2009, the default has been to view all of these products as essentially, you start from they're dangerous. You look at it through essentially a very, very conservative, precautionary, principled approach to reviewing them and regulating them. And really, the framing, if not backwards, is still quite skewed, because the framing ought to be looking at these products as ideally, collectively, a major opportunity for a public health benefit. The fact that so few of these products have gotten through review and been authorized for sale in all of these years that FDA has been looking at these products, while there are several thousand combustible, traditional, conventional, combustible tobacco products, cigarettes on the market, makes no logical sense. It just makes no sense. And it is reflective of the fact that these alternative products are seen as scary. They're a concern. They're a threat to kids. And so that's how we have to approach it at the outset and then take it from there.
So, Cliff, the so-called tobacco endgame has now morphed into the nicotine endgame. I'd like to know what you think about that. Is it possible to eradicate all nicotine use?
Well, hell no. And why would one want to do that? Nicotine is understood, in certain contexts at least, to be a very useful and beneficial drug. And this is, the evidence around that has grown over many years. In fact, even at the time of that first Surgeon General's report on nicotine addiction was released in 1988. So going on 40 years ago, there was already good research that had been developed around the cognitive benefits of nicotine, its use in treating neurological disorders, and that research has continued, and the evidence around that has grown. So first of all, there are those benefits that people have to be aware of. But the fact of the matter is, if you were to somehow try to eliminate all nicotine, when you've got right now something on the order of 1.3 billion smokers on the planet, many of whom are not going to stop, which is, would seem to be the central issue here, right? Everyone's talking about helping people, supporting them. Many of them, with fewer resources, fewer years of education, from the more disadvantaged populations within our society, and this is true around the world. If you really want to reduce the damage that is accruing and going to accrue to that huge number of people, and you want to save more of those lives, nicotine not only shouldn't be done away with, it should be front and center in the strategy, because it can enable us to transform the marketplace over time into something that is quite different and far healthier for this really large percentage of the people on planet Earth.